What's up? Welcome to Unit 1, Lesson 3. Today we're going to be talking about segment and angle bisectors. Okay. We got a little bit of vocab at the beginning, bisecting a segment. So midpoint, okay, is a point that divides or bisects a segment into two congruent segments. So it's a point that's, if you think about the word midpoint, it should make you think of middle. So midpoint is in the middle of a segment. Okay. If you notice our hash marks here, that means it cuts it into two equal pieces. Cuts it right down the middle and half. A segment bisector, okay, that's a segment, ray, or line or plane that intersects a segment at its midpoint. So as we can see, we have a line that goes through the midpoint. So that's a segment bisector. And again, we're cutting the segment into two equal pieces. So can we find the midpoint of a segment in the coordinate plane? So we got 2 points and we want to try to find the midpoint. Well, if you understand kind of the concept of the middle, basic arithmetic will tell you that the middle of 0 and 4, half of 4, is 2. But the thing that you want to be careful of here, or remember, is that anytime we say midpoint, we need a point, a coordinate. So we need two numbers. So 2 and 0. Midpoint, again, point, we need two coordinates for between 0, 0 and 0, negative 6. The x's are both 0, so we know it's going to be 0. And then between 0 and negative 6, half of negative 6 is negative 3. Negative 3, 2 to 5, 2, midpoint. Okay, you might not be able to kind of look at this one and get where the midpoint would be, so let's plot this one. So we got negative 3, 2, and 5, 2. Now, conceptually, we want to think of the midpoint as a point in the middle. That means it's the same distance, equidistant is a word you'll hear a lot in geometry, equidistant, which means the same distance from both endpoints. So one way we can show that is we can go, okay, we're going 1 this way, 1 this way, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and 4. So at this point right here, it's 4 away from this endpoint, it's 4 away from this endpoint, right? That's the middle. So that point is 1, 2. Okay, we got 3, negative 4, 2, 3, 4. All right, 3, negative 4, and 3, 4. Same idea, we want the middle. Okay. If you notice, we got the 3's, the x's are the same, but we got negative 4 and 4. Right? If you think about a number line, that probably means that the number in the middle, because 4 and negative 4 are opposites of each other, that the point that has to be in the middle is 0. So this is going to be 3, 0, which would be 4 away from each point. Now, if you remember the last video at all, you know that what's coming up next is some kind of trick. We have negative 3, 1, and we have 1, negative 5. So here we are running into a diagonal again, and we need to find the midpoint. Okay. But if we look back at what we did for each of the ones before, right, we just found half of whatever was changing. Okay, so in the first one, only the x changed. So we just went half of 4. The second one, only the y changed. So we went half of negative 6. The third one, again, the x changed. From negative 3 to 5, that's Um, we needed something that was equidistant between those two numbers, but the x was the only thing changing. And then for the fourth one, only the y changed. For the last one, with the diagonal, we're having both change, which is why it's a diagonal line, right? When an x and y changes, it's not going to be vertical or horizontal, it's going to be diagonal. But we can apply the same principles that we used to kind of figure it out. So when the x was changing, especially in the first one, we just found halfway between the x's. So we can do the same thing here. And when the y was changing, we just found, well, halfway between y. So all we're going to want to do, right, is take these points, -3, 1, and 1, -5, and find the halfway point between the x's and the y. So if we're going in the x direction, we're going to have to go here, right, because that's the same. X is the blue point, right? This is how we're going to figure out the difference in the x directions. So we're going to apply the same method. We have 1 this way, 1 this way, 2, 2, and we meet right there. Okay. So we know that our middle for x is going to be -1. And then for the y direction, we're going to have to do the same thing. We can start here, for instance, and we're going to have to count up and down. So we got 1 this way, 1 this way, 2, 2, 3, 3. So our middle of the y is going to be here, which is going to be -2 for our y. And where they meet, right, if you go from this red arrow to this red point, so where it's going to meet with this red point, that's going to be the same coordinate as our midpoint, -1, -2. Now that's just how we want to look at it conceptually. Of course, there's going to be an easier way to do this. You have the formula on the next page of the notes, but that's just how we're going to want to look at it conceptually. So we look at the formula for midpoint. You add the x's, divide by 2. You add the y's and divide by 2. And it's just that simple. So we look at this first example. We have x1, x2. We have y1, y2. So we add the x's. We got 4 plus -2 divided by 2. 4 plus -2, 4 minus 2, that's 2 divided by 2 is 1. This is for our x's. And then for our y's, we have 3 plus 0 divided by 2, which is going to equal 3 divided by 2, 1.5. So for our x coordinate, we have 1, and for our y coordinate, we have 1.5. So the midpoint is going to be 1.5. And that's going to be our answer. So either quickly right now, if you want to pause the video, take a second, complete these exercises, or you can wait till we're done with the whole thing and you can go back and do it at the end. But I'm going to move on to something a little more complicated because it has another step. This is going to be finding the coordinates of an endpoint, okay, given a midpoint. So before we were given 2 endpoints and we're asked what's the middle. Here we're given one endpoint and the midpoint and asking, okay, this midpoint is halfway between what two endpoints? So the one that we're given, and then we have to find out the other one. But if we think about the equation, what we have up here, x1 plus x2 divided by 2, this equals the midpoint of x, the middle x. And along the same lines, y1 plus y2 is the midpoint of y. So now we can kind of use algebra and plug in to figure out how to find endpoints. So we go back here to this example. The midpoint of RP is 2, 4. So we have our midpoint of x, and we have our midpoint y. Okay? And then one endpoint is -1, so we have our x1 or x2, doesn't matter. And we have our y1 or y2, it doesn't matter. They just have to be the same. So now if we think about the equation, well, it was x1 plus x2 divided by 2 equals the midpoint of x. So we have two things that we can plug in here. We have x1, which was -1. We don't know x2, but we know the midpoint of x is 2. So then you would have to multiply by 2. You get -1 plus x2 equals 4, right? Then solve for x2. You should end up getting x2 is equal to 5. And along the same lines, we have our, now we got to do our y. So we have y1 plus y2 divided by 2 equals the midpoint of y. And again, we can plug in, we know y1 is 7. We don't know y2, that's what we're trying to find. Divided by 2 equals midpoint of y, which was 4. So if we multiply both sides by 2, we get 7 plus y2 equals 8. So y2 has to be 1. So from these two from our x and our y, we can find our coordinate. So our x is 5 and our y is 1. And that is the endpoint. So again, either you guys take a second now, pause the video and do these exercises, or you can finish your notes and come to it at the end. There's one more page of notes, should be pretty quick. Next, we're going to talk about angle bisectors, which is pretty much the same thing as segment bisectors, except that we're now talking about angles. But the angle bisector cuts the angle into 2 equal pieces. And if you notice, we have arc marks instead of hash marks that kind of tell you that those 2 angles are congruent to each other. So QS is the angle bisector, it tells us. So that means QS is cutting this angle in half. Well, if this side is 40, then this side has to be 40. Similarly, QS is the angle bisector. If this side is 64, then this side has to be 64. Now we throw a little algebra in there. We have BC is the bisector. Solve for x. Well, BC cuts it in half, so we know that those 2 angle measures have to be the same. Right, and the math term for the same is equal to, so we just set them equal to each other. We have 4x plus 31, and we have x plus 46, and then we can solve for x. Subtract x on both sides, subtract 31 on both sides, you should end up with x is equal to 5. That's all I have for this lesson. So go ahead and finish the exercises. Please ask if you need assistance. And then show it to me when you're finished.